Welcome to the Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast, hosted by David Mandell, an attorney, author, and OJM Group partner. We share real-world financial lessons from physicians and insights from experts to impact your bottom line. Check the show notes to get a free copy of our book, Wealth Strategies for Today's Physician. Now, over to David.
Hello, it's Dave Mandell, host of the podcast. Thanks for tuning in, either on all the audio podcast platforms, or if you're watching, following on video. I know very few people do that, but we are here on video. So let me tell you about Dr. Paul Lynch. I'm really excited to have him. He and I just spoke together last week, and let me give you a short bio. He's got a really significant bio, especially a lot of good clinical stuff. And we'll put that in the show notes, but I'll give you the high level right now. So Dr. Paul Lynch is a double board certified, fellowship trained pain management physician, anesthesiologist with 17 years of experience treating a wide range of chronic pain conditions. With a focus on comprehensive evidence-based care, Paul is dedicated to vigilant adherence to the highest standards in pain management best practices. He's also an entrepreneur, has built significant businesses and practices, and is a frequent speaker on the business of medicine. In fact, just last week, he and I co-chaired a business section at a regional medical meeting. He has spoken on entrepreneurship, scaling a practice, real estate, and more. And like I said, we'll link to his significant bio in the show notes. Paul, good to see you again, just a week, and thanks for being on.
Nice to see you, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So every doc that I have on this program, I ask the same question. Where'd you grow up? What made you become a physician? And then for you, with a specialty in anesthesiology and pain management, how did you navigate into that specialty?
Yeah, well, again, thanks for having me today. I'm excited to talk to your viewers. I really enjoyed getting to know you last week, and I was very impressed with your ability to stay on time.
That's important.
I do a lot of these, right? I do a lot of these meetings, and most people don't take it as seriously as me. And I'm looking at a stopwatch the whole time. And I really enjoyed how you managed to, even with all the topics and all the questions we were taking. I thought it was a lot of fun. So I look forward to doing that more, David.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Kentucky and Indiana. We call it Kentuckiana, on both sides of the Ohio River. My dad was a licensed clinical social worker, and my mom was a nurse. And I knew that I wanted to, help patients. I wasn't quite sure what. I always wanted to be a psychiatrist, and I grew up reading my dad's books and wanting to help people, with psychiatric conditions. And I went to college and then medical school. I was actually a psychology major in college. So I really focused on that. And then in medical school, most of my electives were in psych. And I just thought that was going to be my career path. When I was about 3 weeks from graduating medical school, my mother-in-law, I was diagnosed with a severe form of cancer. And so I started going to the hospital to help with her care. And I didn't know anything about pain management. This was, 2002. And so, pain was still fairly new at that time. It's really come a long way, over the last 20 to 25 years. But as I started researching things that we could do, she had 7 fractures in her spine. And so there's a procedure that we do called a vertebroplasty or kyphoplasty. I started researching that to see if we could get her that. She had a lot of tumor in her belly, and she needed what was called a celiac plexus block, which is a very advanced procedure for cancer pain, but can take away the pain like that. And then she even probably needed an intrathecal pump where we can bathe the spinal cord and brain with, opioids or local anesthetics or different medications to take away the pain. And each of these procedures, as I read about them, it blew my mind. Like I had no idea that this stuff existed. I had spent most of my life thinking I wanted to help people with mental suffering. And I had this vision of, pain management. What a great career. I could help them with mental suffering and with physical suffering at the same time. And so with about 2 weeks left in medical school, I dropped out of my psychiatry residency, which was quite scary. We were in New York City at the time. My wife went to NYU, and I had a residency set, out in Long Island, and everything was great. And then, and I had nothing. And so I had to kind of scramble and figure out how to get into anesthesia, how to become a pain doctor. And that's probably a story for another day, but I'm really glad that I chose pain as a specialty.
Yeah. That's interesting. Thankfully, you hit the maybe, if you could ideally do it, you might say, "Hey, maybe a couple of years before, so I wasn't in my last,
Right.
semester there," but good then, and, maybe to me, and you might say this is true, but as someone who's had some, back issues and pain, it affects the psychology, it affects your mood, it affects your thoughts, right? And so you're helping people, who, probably really psychologically, benefit from that. You're just doing it in a different way than your dad did and other folks. So it's kind of related in my mind, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
So tell us, about the practice. Obviously, you've got, your own practice and things you've done entrepreneurially. Did you start that way? Did you start in an anesthesia group or a pain group? And like, to give us
Yeah.
a little picture of the early part of your career.
Sure. Yeah, I knew that I wanted to start my own practice, and
Okay.
so I moved to Arizona with my best friend Tori McJunkin. We went to college together, in medical school, and his dad was a chiropractor out here, and so we moved out here planning to start our practice. But as things happen, we weren't ready to start, by July 1st. So we were still trying to get on the insurance contracts. We hadn't been credentialed. And so again, life kind of takes a little bit of a detour. We were able to get jobs at the Mayo Clinic here in town, which was really awesome. And so I started my very first job was at Mayo Clinic in the summer of 2007. I was doing the math when you were talking. It's been 18 years now, actually.
Yeah, that's right.
So I started at Mayo Clinic and I did anesthesia and I worked in the pain group. And I would say that Mayo, I'm so happy that that happened because the way that we practice medicine at Mayo, I still think is the model for the whole country, if not the whole world. When I worked in the pain clinic, I would often see they would have new patient slots at specific times, and I would see a new patient at 10. The patient would typically come in and get an MRI at 8, and then they would go to physical therapy at 9, and then they come see me at 10. I would almost always have the report from the radiologist by the time the patient sat down, and I could usually time it that right around 10:30 when I was starting to make my note. They would have the physical therapy results as well, and it was just the way it was integrated. I called it comprehensive integrated care, and that approach that I learned at the Mayo Clinic is what I took into my first practice. And so um, we were we were kind of like an overnight success in Arizona. It was a crazy story, but I started building our website while I was in fellowship, and we basically published like an online free textbook for patients. And my idea was, and I didn't tell you this part of the story, but my mother-in-law, I wanted her to get the kyphoplasty, and I couldn't find anyone in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where she was at that did that procedure, and so she ended up dying before she got some of the treatments she really needed. And then years later, I found out there were doctors there. They just weren't advertising and I couldn't find them. And so one of my goals was to put this website out there, not in order to make $1 billion and make the biggest, practice in the world, but because I wanted to make sure patients had access to us if they needed us. So we started writing this website during our fellowship, and the whole idea was almost going to be like a textbook. And we published, all this information about the different procedures and different diagnoses. And I still remember I was at Mayo Clinic. We were putting patients to sleep. We had a 4-to-1 supervision ratio. So it meant we had 4 rooms that we were supervising with a CRNA in each room. And I got finished and I sat down. And every day I would go through and I would type in like low back pain, Arizona. And I would count because I wasn't that sophisticated. I would count what page we were on for Google. And I'd write in my notebook, like, oh, we're on page 37 for low back pain. And then the next day it went to 34. And I was happy for the growth. So one day in about August of 2007, I get done with some of the, putting people to sleep, and I sit down with a cup of coffee and I type in low back pain, Arizona, and we were the #1 search on Google.
Ah,
And I was like, oh, this is an error. So I like cleared the cache, got rid of the cookies, did whatever. I typed again, we're #1. And then I was like, okay, I typed in neck pain, Arizona, and we were #1. And then the procedure that was close to my heart, I typed in vertebroplasty, Arizona, and we were #1. And I want to be clear on this. We had not opened our practice
yeah, I'd
yet.
say now it's time to
But
jump out from Mayo at that point, right? So
right. And so almost in that exact moment, like it's a scene from a movie, my cell phone rang because I put my cell phone on the website because we had just launched it. We didn't have any employees. And so I pick up and they're like, oh, yeah, I want to see Dr. Lynch. And so I was like, okay, when do you want to see him? And they're like, I don't know. And I was like, let me look at my calendar. And I looked and I knew that we were going to start the week of October 22nd. So I was like, could you come in at 8 a.m. on October 22nd? And she's like, oh, that's booked out pretty far, but I guess so. And then she's like, and who's this? And I was like, oh, this is Dr. Lynch. And she's like, you answer the phone? I was like, well, yeah, we just started. And so it's a funny story.
Work on your falsetto voice there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The phone started ringing, Dave. And by the time we opened, we had 40 new patients the first week, all from the internet. And within a year, we were getting 350 new patients a month. And it just kind of grew. So I like to tell people when we're having business conversations, I was kind of drinking from the fire hose almost from day one that I launched my practice. Like I could almost not keep up with the volume, early in my career, which was, looking back on it, an incredible experience because I learned so much in such a fast time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to pick up back there in a second, but I mean, first of all, 2007, we've launched OJM Group in 2007. I've been writing books my whole career, maybe before I really knew what I had to do as a lawyer, like back, 30 years ago, I wrote a book, The Doctor's Asset Protection Guide. I knew just enough of what was in that book. It was really a lot of stuff I learned from my mentor, who since passed away, and always had the phone ringing because of that. So I see some similarities there in your story.
Nice.
And
Nice.
very few physicians and frankly lawyers did it that way, right? I mean, we're just not trained in law school or in med school to think entrepreneurially or marketing wise, but you were doing it, and you were doing it because you wanted patients to find you. But little did you know, or maybe in the back of your mind, it's like, if we do this right, we're going to get a lot of patients, which is good for practice. So now you jump out, you have your practice, you're well trained now, you're coming out of Mayo, you have the confidence to do it. Drinking from the fire hose, it must have been challenging because it's always challenging to grow, right? Hiring people and figuring out like how to run a practice, and do we need another doc, and just the growing pains of all that. So take us back to that time period.
Sure. So it was, and I'll jump ahead a little bit because it'll help for context. When I started US Pain Care, I had a 2-year restrictive covenant. And so my wife and I started doing these date nights consistently. I mean, we've always gone on dates. I've been married 28 years and we have 5 kids and, whatever. We always have dates. But we started saying we want to make a weekly date night that we never miss for any reason, come hell or high water. And we would typically do it on Thursday. This is Thursday, so we're going out tonight.
Okay, nice. Yeah.
So this is about maybe 2.5 years ago, right after I'd sold, we had a restrictive covenant. We started going out every Thursday, and my wife would help me kind of create my new kind of like US Pain Care manifesto is what I called it. So when I started Arizona Pain, I had like the Arizona Pain manifesto, like how we're going to run our business, and very idealistic document. I went back and read it and I was like, some of this is good, some of it's bad. But I wanted to do it again through the lens of my experience. And what we decided early on, and wives are good at this, which is I wanted to focus on the errors that I made, right? So I told my wife, I was like, hey, I need help going back over the last 17 years of my career and mapping out my errors.
I made all my mistakes. Oh, well, I happen to have a list here, Paul. Here you go.
That's exactly right. And she's the loveliest lady ever. I'm kind of joking.
I'm married.
But I thought, so here was the idea, and I want to be really clear. Yeah. I don't want to pat myself on the back so much that I hurt my shoulder. I want to go back and have an honest look in the mirror. What did I do wrong? Because I remember the good stuff that I did right. What if I build a whole company around what I did wrong the first time and try to avoid those errors? So I told my wife, she was in, and we started doing it. And honestly, this process, I bet it took 6 months of date nights and talking and every week and going through it. And I thought that it was going to be 10 things. That's really what I thought, 10 or 12 things that I could show to people. And by the time I got done, I had a list of 53 errors that I made the first time I started. And this is a very highly secretive document. I couldn't tell you every single thing either. Because in the beginning, we would use the people's names like, oh, we should have fired so-and-so quicker, and then we realized, oh, we should probably make a edited version of this that I could share with people. But what I'll tell you with that as a background,
it's great.
2007, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, David. I mean, I didn't know about real estate. I didn't know about finance. I didn't know about accounting. I didn't know about signing contracts or HR. The first person I ever fired, I hugged them on the way out the door because they were crying. And then I was crying and then I'm hugging. And it's like, I didn't know what I was doing. I made mistakes. This is a true story. We had 60 full-time employees before we had employment files because we were just hiring as we possibly could. We acquired.
And you weren't trained to do it. How would you know? Yeah, like, it's not like I know all about that stuff too. I mean, you learn hard knocks. Are you smart enough, wise enough to get someone who can handle it or teach you it? So,
But I will tell you that a couple of the categories that we learned really
yeah,
early on, which I think that you would agree with, is you have to, these doctors that I mentor today, I've got a lot of doctors that I work with. You've got to get experts on the team early on.
yeah,
So you need an expert in finance. And I know that's something you're great at. Listening to you talk last week was so, exciting. You need experts in law. When I hired my first attorney, people think I'm crazy. I interviewed 8 attorneys to be my attorney because I wanted to make sure. I was very OCD. And about the 5th or 6th interview, the guy asked me if I talked to anyone else, and I said 4 other people, and he was like, "Why would you talk to so many?" And I was like, "Why would I not?" And I would ask him like, "What percentage of your practice is healthcare?" And they'd say, "Oh, 50%." And then the guy that I chose, he was like, "100%. This is all I do all day long." And I was like, "Okay, that's my guy." And to this day, he's on my team.
yeah,
But you get a good attorney, you get a good accountant, you get someone good at finance, you
right.
get someone who understands real estate. And then that idea of the right people extends to nurse practitioners and physicians and MAs. And like, if you get the right people on your team, that drives so much of the success, whether it's advisors or employees. And I
Yeah.
can tell you more of the mistakes I made, but those were a lot of the categories were around not having the right people around me.
You know, First of all, it's so great and interesting as a business case study what you did, right? You were able to um, really, go from good to great. There's that famous business book, Good to Great,
Yeah.
right? And they look at these, and it comes out of Harvard Business School case studies. And I think like Walgreens is one of the companies that was already like 100-year-old company. It was doing well, but how did it go from this market cap to this? How did it go from this many? And it often is taking a critical look at not the things you're doing well, but the
Yeah.
things you're not doing as well, right?
Yeah.
Because, the things you're doing well, yeah, you could get a little better at it, but that's probably not going to move the needle. And you were, thoughtful enough and had the time and, circumstances lend itself to really focus on, what do I learn from that? And a lot of, folks either don't do that introspection, don't have the time to do it, don't have the chance to like apply it again in something new. um, so that's one thing that stands out to me, really a great, really universal business story, what you just said there. You're talking about healthcare, but it could be applied to anything. And then the second thing, which is the people and decisions around that. And that's challenging, especially for all of us as professionals, whether they're attorneys or physicians, fine. We don't really get trained in that. Like you didn't have a day of like how to choose the right people around you in medical school. But if you think about how important that is, it should be a big piece of it. I mean, there should be a whole section that's my sort of soapbox on business issues, and part of that should be team issues. So I'm not
Yeah.
surprised that you say that.
Well, Dave, one thing I think is interesting is you bring up Jim Collins's famous book, Good to Great. I mean, I've read that multiple times and recommended it to my staff. But the follow-up, his next book was called How the Mighty Fall. And it talks about these companies that,
Right.
had these principles, but then they get a little bit too enamored with their own Kool-Aid. And he talks about the hubris, in the first chapter that they develop. And so that's actually what I was trying to do. I think I based Arizona Pain and then what was called Pain Doctor on Good to Great, getting the right people on the bus and putting them in the right seat on the bus and all that. And then I based US Pain Care a little bit on How the Mighty Fall to say, okay, how do I make sure I don't replicate some of the mistakes I made the first time? Because I certainly wasn't perfect. I made a lot of errors over the years and errors on how I dealt with doctors. And I'll give you one example. I did 3 or 4 private equity deals over the first, 15 years of my career. And all of them came down to the same kind of playbook, which is you go in, you value your practice, you buy a majority, you roll up controlling interests, you have control of the finances and the accounting, and you do all these things that can protect your investment. And the doctor becomes almost just like a cog on the wheel. And what I found after doing maybe 100 deals with doctors under this classic private equity model is I think it's the wrong model. And so what I've done with US Pain Care, without getting into too many of the details, is I'm never the majority. I'm a minority owner. I go and I try to empower physicians just the way we did together. We're teaching them and helping them and showing them how to be more successful. You can take the stuff that I learned over the last 15, 16, 17 years, the good and the bad, and then I can play 50 games of chess at the same time across the country, show these guys how to be more successful, how to make more money, how to help their patients. And I learned that by doing it the first time, but then I shifted it to create, I believe, a better mousetrap.
So in the current structure, the U.S. pain structure, if a physician or practice, became part of your part of your practice or whatever the actual legal structure is, you're taking a minority investment in there. They still have control and whatever there's probably some elements of shared stuff, but you can basically empower them by giving them the knowledge of what you've gone through, right? Like, "Hey, here's a great way to do it." And
That's it.
I'm going to use this word, and I don't mean it in the same way, but I think all the positives of a franchise, right? A franchise isn't, people think of it, all McDonald's, et cetera. But what was so great about McDonald's is they figured out like the whole business process of bringing that product to market in a good way, and I could have one, and it's like the first one I've ever done. So why would I start from scratch? They can teach me everything. And the other thing about McDonald's, and you brought it up in your video, which I do remember, is Ray Kroc being told, played by Michael Keaton, that you're in the real estate business. And I know
That's it.
I didn't even
Yeah.
mean as I started this to segue into that, but let's talk about
Yeah,
that because
let's do.
real estate is. I did listen to
Let me
that
say one
lecture.
thing before
Yeah, before we go there, go ahead. Yeah.
I want to say one thing is it's so important. It is the opposite of a franchise, what I'm
Okay.
doing. And
Okay.
what I mean by that is all my private equity people had the same idea. We're going to be the same in every market. We're going to get the same EMR, the same approaches, we're going to do an epidural here. We're going to do an epidural there. What they don't realize is every single market in the United States is different. If you go try to practice in San Diego, I promise you it is different than trying to practice in Oklahoma because it's driven by insurance. And in San Diego, they'll say, oh, you're not allowed to do this in the hospital. You have to do it in the office. In another state, they'll say, oh, that's not covered in the office. We don't like the office. And so if you try to take this cookie cutter franchise approach with pain management, oh, by the way, and I'll give you another example. There might be a doctor who trained at a very famous regenerative medicine institute, and that's what he does. It's only regenerative medicine. And there's another guy that might be the top neuromodulator in the world. And if I come in with my cookie cutter approach and try to change their care, you actually get worse care for the patient. What you should do is find doctors who are good doctors, even if they're a little bit different, and support them with very similar concepts, which is good accounting advice and finance and good legal advice and understanding real estate, negotiating good contracts, taking care of people, right? These are the things that you can do everywhere, but those aren't franchise ideas. Those are just good, sound business principles. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. I mean, there's an element of, and I can relate to this from an asset protection point of view. Every state's different, but also,
Yeah.
what you're
Yes.
bringing is, it's sort of business knowledge rather than franchise, right? It's just
That's
business
it.
operational expertise and
Yes.
allowing that to be flexible enough to work around the rules that go on in that place and the doctors and their expertise in the way they
That's it.
practice.
That's it. That's
So
it.
that, that sounds to me as like something that would be very successful. I'm not surprised that it is. So let's get back to that real estate concept too,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I really, I learned a lot listening. I know what a REIT is. I have some knowledge of cap rates, but you were really getting into it in a way that shows you've been there. You've lived it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, for the docs, listening and watching, who might have a building, might be thinking about it, it might be on their list of things they want to do. Just give us like, a couple minutes on what you've learned and what they should be thinking about.
Yeah. So I think as a background, I launched my practice in 2007
Yeah, right.
and I was renting my house and it got foreclosed on and we got an eviction notice and my wife was 8 months pregnant.
Jeez.
And we got an eviction notice that we had to leave. And we said, but we've been paying the rent. And they said, it doesn't matter. the landlord's not been paying. And so you have to leave. And I said, no, I don't want to. I'm staying. And then they said, well, you have to leave by this date. And if not, we're going to come lock you out. And I said, well, what if I just buy the house? And they said, well, it's going up for auction next month on January 7th of 2008 or whatever, right as the housing crisis was happening. And I'm going to buy the house.
Everything was
And so
falling at that point too.
they said, if you don't get it, then we're coming to evict you the next day. I said, that's fine. I'm going to roll the dice. So I showed up and I bought my first house, been foreclosed on. That was my first real estate experience. And I got pretty spooked by the real estate industry. And so I went in, and when I did my first practice, I didn't own the real estate at first. And then I won't go through all the stuff I learned, but what I learned over the years is the value of the real estate under your practice is often worth more than the practice itself, right? And I did a couple of deals and I started teaching doctors. I think about the practice as being the real estate's worth 3 different levels. Like number 1 is just buy your building, pay it off, the brick and mortar value. If you're in, whatever city and it's $400 a square foot and you have a, 5,000 square foot building, that's going to be worth about $2 million at the end of your career. And you can sell that real estate and have your practice pay it off over time. And you have tax benefits, and like, you should at minimum do that. But number 2, there's a better way. What if you sign a long-term lease, right? And you have a practice that's profitable. You can often have the practice guarantee the lease, not the doctor. Not the doctor. I spent a lot of time trying to get my doctor off of personal guarantees,
Right.
so that the practice is guaranteeing the building, not the doctor. And now, what if you sign a long-term lease and you pay a monthly amount? You sell that one, what's called a cap rate, which, we won't get too much into that, but basically a cap rate is what the percentage return is for the investor. And so you could take that same building that's worth $2 million and maybe sell it for $3 million by signing a long-term lease and then signing it from the practice. So you could take, you could go from owning nothing, or you could have a $2 million building. Or what if I did that same $2 million building, I sign a long-term lease and I buy it back for $3 million. And then there's a third level, which I've literally just learned about in the last couple of years, which is called a REIT, or real estate investment trust. And so as we're growing, and our expectation is that we are going to become the largest pain group in the country. We're rolling up these practices all over, and about 75% of the doctors that I've done deals with, or I'm doing deals with, own their own building. So now the question is, what if you sign these long-term leases, but then you roll them all up into a vehicle called a real estate investment trust that, by the way, you have some really nice tax advantages of, but more importantly, it's almost like a mutual fund for buildings, right? Like an investor, you could buy one stock or you could buy an entire sector. And most investors would rather have a sector, so they're, protected against variation, at one company. You could do the same thing with buildings. If you're an investor, would you rather buy one building from Paul in Scottsdale, and I've signed a long-term lease, or would you rather buy a part of 1,000 buildings that are all personally guaranteed by profitable businesses across the country and all owned by physicians? And our advisors have told us that we believe a physician-owned REIT that had diversity across the country could decrease our cap rate. So if you decrease the cap rate, that means a higher purchase price when we sell. We believe we could decrease our cap rate maybe by 20, 30, or even 40% versus just doing it on a one-off.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, certainly, at OJM Group in managing assets, we've been on the other side with clients, including myself, investing in REITs, right? And sometimes they're private and sometimes they go public, and there's lots of different elements to that. But I think the main takeaway here is that if you've got real estate, or you're thinking about, you're renting now, this is something you should get knowledgeable about, because there's value there, and there's different ways to calculate that value. And you want to be efficient, and you want to be smart about that, because it could be a nice piece of what you're building for your retirement. And you're going to need a place to practice somewhere. You can't be a virtual doc, I mean, you got to see patients. There's got to be stuff. So why not understand how that's an asset that can grow for you, and grow for you as efficiently as possible? That's, I think, the big takeaway. And you've learned that. And you're trying to, leverage that for other docs. And I want everyone here, watching and listening, to think of it that way, and to learn more and go deeper in there.
And one other thing I wanted to say is, a lot of people call me and they want to know, how they can make more money. And I like, when I work with these doctors, I want to focus on 2 things: how we can provide better care to their patients, first and foremost, but then also how to make sure that they're more profitable. Because if they're not profitable, they can't provide better care to their patients, right?
They're going to be more higher stress, burnout, get out of medicine completely. Maybe the practice won't even be sustainable. They'll end up having to be employed somewhere and all that. Right.
So I talk to my docs about ethical ways to increase their profitability. What I mean by ethical, one of my mentors, his name is Ken Sutton. He's at NYU in the anesthesia department, just a wonderful, fabulous teacher. He taught me early in my career, don't ever try to make your fortunes on the back of your patient.
Right.
Right. Like it's not overutilizing or ordering one more procedure or one more
Right.
surgery. Learn how to run your business and make your fortunes outside of medicine. And so real estate is such a perfect example. The patient doesn't care, if you own the building or not. It has nothing to do with delivery of care. But if you're going to spend $10,000 a month for rent, why not own that building at the end
Right.
of your career? And then I would go a step further, which is owning your own facility. And the easiest way to do that is surgery centers. So if you are a busy interventionalist and you do these procedures and you work in a surgery center setting, why not own the real estate, but go a step further? Why not own the real estate and the surgery center? And then at the end of your career, instead of it being a $2 million building, it might be a $5 million building. And people don't think about that. You could literally just focus 100% on good patient care. You don't need to make millions of dollars today, but at the end of your career, part of your retirement could be a $5 million building with a surgery center. I mean, that's very smart financial planning in my mind. And you're not making your money on the backs of the patients.
And it's really moving the needle. I mean, it really does. That's a number that will make a big difference in people's lives as physicians, their spouses, their families, et cetera. So, totally agree with that. We had Jason Grace, who's a great attorney on, who has an episode, I think it's season 3 or 4. Those of you who are listening, watching, check it out. All about ASCs from a legal point of view. What you should be thinking about, if you're going to create one, if you're going to buy into one, et cetera. So that's another good cross reference. Go check that one out. 2 more questions, Paul, and then I want to wrap because time's valuable for you and obviously for everybody listening. So you've always done it, as you've told me, but you've added more with all the things you're doing and all the success you're having in terms of expert witness work. So tell us just like how that started way back and, why you're doing some more of that these days.
Yeah. Sometimes businesses just kind of, if you're like a serial entrepreneur, sometimes these businesses just happen and you weren't even meaning to. So I first started doing expert witness work probably all the way back in 2008 or 9. Like early on, I did a lot of accident cases, and then I would testify as a treating physician, which is typical. There's a difference between a treating physician testifying. That's where you show up and say, I did this epidural and this epidural, and it was, you didn't even get in trouble. You just have to testify in a case if there was like an accident, right? That's a
Okay.
treating physician. But some of the attorneys realized that I was really good at it, that I was good at taking kind of complex conversations and explain it. So at a very early age, in my early 30s, I started getting retained to be an expert witness. And so what an expert witness does is I didn't treat the patient at all. I come in as a third party and I try to give advice to the judge and the jury on this is what the standard of care is. This is what's below the standard of care. And so I started doing it in the accident space, the late 2008, 9, 10 area. And then I started getting a lot more calls, but I never really spent a lot of time on it. But then when I sold my practice the last time, I had a 2-year restrictive covenant. Expert witness work was a way that I could kind of pay for the launch of my new company without going and try to get a bunch of PE money, which I told you before I didn't want to do. I wanted to self-finance. And so I started advertising. I put up a website. I started advertising on LinkedIn. I started advertising in bar association manuals and stuff. And I was blown away at the amount of phone calls I got. And so I think in the last 12 months, I've probably got 100 cases.
Wow.
And so much that I can't even do the work myself. And so I started hiring other experts. So now I have about 10 experts that
Wow.
work under my company. So if you want an anesthesiologist, I have you. If you want a physical medicine rehab doc, I've got that. If you need a psychiatrist or a primary care. So now I get all these calls and we say yes to all of them. I end up hiring a full-time legal nurse consultant and then 2 other assistants that would help. And like yesterday alone, we got two cases in one day yesterday.
Wow.
And so what's been great about that is, I learned so much about the standard of care when I'm doing one of these cases. I have to memorize all the guidelines from all the different associations and who says what. And I think it makes me a better doctor. And it also makes my doctors better doctors because I'm always on top of them. Hey, don't do that. Don't do that. This is the new standard of care. Like I have to stay up on top of everything. And then it also created cash flow to help me launch my company.
Terrific. And also, I think it also just shows like your willingness as you said it, and skill, acumen in marketing, getting the word out there, right? Because you're saying you mentioned bar association journals or what have you. You're not afraid to say, hey, listen, we need to put some money out there and do some proactive either advertising or other marketing, et cetera, if we want the phone to ring. And you're relying on your experience, which was your cell phone ringing when you were in the OR 20 years ago. And I want doctors to hear that, because again, a lot of docs want to grow their practice, but they just haven't done marketing because they think marketing is something that doctors don't do or they didn't do in the last generation, right? You should just wait for referrals and people to, but we're in a different world and people are going to go online and all that. So I wanted to point that out. It makes sense. Last question, Paul.
Yes, sir.
Either back in time to yourself, if you had a time machine, or a young doc that you might be talking to or, lecturing to. One thing, you got a lot of advice you've given, but if you could go back and just sort of one thing about the business of medicine, career, what's like a high level piece of advice you'd give?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have to go back to Ken Sutton's advice, and I didn't mean to give it away too early in the show, kind of ruin the finale. But Ken, when I was a resident, he took me in his room, he sat me down, he would teach me these things, and he wrote on the board one day, don't make your fortunes on the backs of your patients. And I think that's the best advice that I give to young doctors is you want to be a good doctor. There's a famous quote, and I can't remember who said it now, which is success should be the shadow of virtue. Which means if you do what's right, if you just take care of the patient, if you take care of your family, if you teach doctors, if you do all these things that we think are good and right and holy or whatever, you're going to get all the success in the world, right? And so when I'm giving advice to young doctors, I tell them, work hard. Let me show you techniques on how you can make more money with real estate or better investing or, marketing, like you talk about.
Right.
That's one of the things that's in my bucket of ethical ways to make more money is learn how to market. Like early in our careers, we would take 10% of every dollar we made and we put it back towards marketing. We called it a marketing tithe because we wanted to constantly be reinvesting into the business.
Awesome.
Another thing that we would do is we would take 50% of all of our profit and we would reinvest it back into the business, into expansion or new clinics or people. And then the last thing we did is we would actually take 5% of all of our profit and give it away. We would literally just give it away, to causes around the world. But to answer your question very specifically, I would tell people, don't try to make your fortunes on the back of your patient. Do what's right. The success will come. And then if you put good people around you that can help you, you can make your money, and it doesn't have to be at the expense of patient care.
Yeah, I think that's terrific, because there is still, and people, I think, and I'm saying this as an outsider, but to my family and with enough doc clients to say, there's a way to be successful in medicine, and you don't have to cut corners. It doesn't have to be on the back of patients, and it doesn't have to be a conflict where it's, hey, I can do the right thing clinically or do the right thing business-wise, right? That's essentially what you're saying. It's like, if you do the right things clinically, you'll be successful, but also think about these other things that don't have to do with clinical, that is related to business, whether it's real estate, or whether it's owning your entity, whether it's finding out what a REIT is, whether it's marketing, et cetera, that will help you there. And there is no conflict with how you're treating the patient. And, that's really in some degrees what OJM's about, right? It's what this podcast is about. I don't talk about how to treat a patient. I never would, presume to say one thing about it. I go to speak at conferences, they put up the slide. I don't even know what part of the body it is. What I'm trying to do is get people to achieve their goals in a way that has nothing to do with a clinical choice. So we're totally aligned on that. And I'm glad you really articulated it that way. And to Dr. Sutton, who, gave you those ideas, I think it's terrific. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
So Paul, thanks for being on. Hopefully everybody here listening, watching, I think we got some really insightful comments. We're going to, of course, put the links to Paul's practice and his bio in the show notes. So if you happen to be in pain medicine, you have to be in anesthesiology, if you want to get involved in some related way with his practice or with a medical expert witness, you'll have a way to get a hold of Paul. So if you're so motivated, give us, a good review or, a 5-star rating on any of the podcast platforms. Tell your friends about us. If you're a physician who has some interesting business, career, financial thoughts you want to share with me and share with our audience, contact me. And in 2 weeks, we'll have another episode. Thanks for tuning in.
The Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast is brought to you by OJM Group, a multidisciplinary wealth management firm dedicated to helping physicians build and preserve their wealth while reducing taxes. Episodes from previous seasons are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other popular platforms. Podcast listeners can get a free copy of our book, Wealth Strategies for Today's Physician. Simply text WPPOD to 844-418-1212 to request your free copy. Be sure to join David every 2 weeks for the newest episode of the Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast. This podcast is being provided for informational purposes only. The ideas and opinions expressed on this show by Mr. Mandell and his guests do not constitute legal tax or investment advice, or a recommendation of any particular security or strategy, and do not represent the opinions of the underwriters of this programming. Any information prepared from third-party sources is believed to be reliable, though its accuracy is not guaranteed. Opinions expressed in this commentary reflect subjective judgments of the speakers, based on conditions at the time of recording, and are subject to change without notice. Listeners should seek the input of their own financial, tax, and legal professionals before acting on any of the information provided.